Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world and experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy. Here is where you free your soma. Welcome, everybody, to Free Your Soma podcast, stories of somatic awakening and how to live from the inside out. I have a very special guest with me today, an embodiment guide and a sought-after source for human design and gene keys. She has a very unique way of synthesizing these methods and really helping people to embody them and have the lived experience of these systems. So if you're not really aware of human design, it is a system of self-knowledge, and it's a synthesis of I Ching, of Western astrology, of the Kabbalah tree of life. And is there another ancient system, Bella, that it might be related to?
The chakra system, the I Ching, astrology, and I think you said the fourth one.
Yeah. So welcome. This is Bella Krystal, and she's here today to share some of her knowledge, some of her experience with these systems. And we're just going to talk and explore how these systems help us to live a more somatically experienced life and really feel into our bodies and the natural guidance system that we carry within our bodies. When I discovered human design, it was so revelatory for me because I loved that it pointed to my aura and my being as having the information needed for me to move forward in my life in an authentic way, right? That this information is inside of me and not outside of myself. And that was this fundamental principle in human design and gene keys that really resonated with me. And so I'm so super excited to talk to you today, to have you share more about your journey with this, because you're also someone who has been quite involved in Tantra and sexual embodiment, and you synthesize that with your understanding of human design. And I think that's really valuable, really incredible. So officially welcome. So happy to have you here. Would you like to share just a little bit about what, for the viewers or listeners who don't really know that much about human design, maybe it's new to them, could you just share what you might tell somebody who's first learning about this, like what it is and what it offers?
Yeah, of course. So for me, I like to speak about the sky. In the moment you're born, there are constellations on the sky, and the planets are going to be somewhere in the sky. And that is planetary bodies, and it's a geometry. That geometry is going to be imprinted in you. So it doesn't really matter if you use astrology, or if you use the I Ching, which is the Chinese system, or if you use human design or gene keys. It's the same imprints that are there, just 4 different ways of explaining them. And what I like with human design and gene keys is that the way that they explain the imprinting is a little bit more modern and a little bit easier to understand than with astrology. Astrology is so vast and there are so many different types. So sometimes we get lost in the explanation. With human design, which came right before gene keys, we found a way of understanding the imprint in terms of how do I walk through life? How do I make decisions based on how I am, how I relate to emotions, how I relate to other people? And it became a system that's not only focused on the understanding of the mind and the personality, which from a human design perspective, we would say that astrology is. It actually has a soul aspect because it's not only looking at your birth date, it's looking at the date that is 88 days before. And we say that that's the soul imprint. So in both human design and gene keys, we're looking at the astrology, the natal chart, together with that soul imprint that came before. And that's also what makes it a kind of dance between your soul and your personality. And that's for me going back to what actually I care about, which is wholeness. And that's also what I heard you speak about, the synthesizing and all the parts of us, and also the life force and sexuality and all these parts. Wholeness is basically what I work with. So you could say, yes, I'm an embodiment guide, but more than anything, I am here to coach to wholeness. And that's also for myself. every single day. There is a check-in, is there wholeness? Where is the fragmentation? And wholeness can be, like we said, all the parts of the body, but it's also more subtle. It's the subtle bodies, or it's our physical body, our mental body, our emotional body, our spiritual bodies, and many different ways of tuning into wholeness. And that's also what I use those maps for human design gene keys, to see how does the energy move in your body, and where could there be a split, where could it feel like you're taking in a lot of other people's energy, so maybe you can't even feel yourself anymore. And I think when we speak about embodiment, often what happens is that there are places that are numb, and that can have to do with trauma, but it doesn't even have to be trauma. It can simply be conditioning of living in our head, or conditioning in different ways. So really just coming back to who we are, that's what we're using those systems to do. And it's not about, like you were saying, just a mental understanding. It's actually understanding it, of course, on an intellectual level, but then bring it in to your body, to your life, to how you walk your everyday life.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. It's so much that you just said there that I could respond to. Really incredible, because this is a somatic system. This is an invitation on so many levels to actually experience what's going on in your body, in your energy field, on a day-to-day basis. And that's what I understand, especially with human design, the grand experiment is all about, is really understanding, like you said, this soul imprint and the things that we arrived with, the tools and the configuration, the specific configuration in our aura that we have arrived with, and then how to actually use that understanding to live more fully and more authentically, because that taking in of energy and that conditioning is so automatic, right? We can't really control that. It happens, it comes in, but how do we then move that energy back out? How do we drain that energy? How do we integrate that energy? And this comes back to, as my work, I'm a HANA somatic educator, and I work very specifically with the muscle systems of people's bodies to help them integrate muscular patterns of stress that their bodies have been accumulating over, their lifetimes. And there is conditioning, there's muscular conditioning, there's nervous system conditioning that's showing up. And this question that I'm often asking people is, well, kind of asking them to ask themselves. And sometimes it's literally like just an energetic invitation rather than an actual phrase. But if the phrase were to be spoken, it would sound like, is this conditioning something that you need to let go of and actually release? Or is this conditioning something that needs to be integrated into your system and be honored as part of you, right? And that differentiation, because it changes and shifts from moment to moment, what conditioning that we take on, right? That other people's energy that you spoke of, right? What part of that is actually wisdom that we are gathering in those open centers? And what part of that is actually stuff that really doesn't belong there, that needs to be actually released from our aura? So, these are the ways in which I kind of see these systems as being embodiment systems, rather than merely like intellectual, personality tests or something like that, right? So tell me a little bit more about your experience with using these systems to help people really embody their individual experience. Like, what's your method? You're first looking at their chart, for example, and then asking them questions, but what kind of process do you take people through in helping them get more embodied through these systems?
Yeah, I have a lot of people that come to me to learn. So we have an academy that I created with Ashley and Nicole a few years ago, and the pandemic helped us to just actually be able to create so much online, because I was traveling a lot before, and with so much time just being in one place, we created a library where people can actually see all the 64 archetypes, because that's what human design and gene keys are. The gates in the body graph are 64, and also the number of gene keys is 64. So we created like a person or an archetype for each key, and that's a free library where people can go and start to learn about their inner archetypes. It's a little bit like when we speak about internal family systems. You have these parts of you and they want to all sit around the table. And then when they do, again, there can be wholeness and they don't pull you in different directions. So a lot of people come to me to learn through the archetypes, and then of course all the courses that we're doing. And that's a way where it's more paced, where you can decide, okay, I'm going to take this course now, it's 3 weeks, or I'm going to take this course now, it's 3 months, and you learn at the same time, and then you can apply that on your family members or your friends or in your work. A lot of people choose to do that. And then I have other people that come to me because they really want to go deep and they don't want to learn the systems. They say, yeah, it's interesting to hear about the numbers, but really tell me about the energy. I want to learn to actually walk through my life or wake up in the morning and feel like I'm myself and that I'm whole and that I'm not in this stress response or trauma response. And then we are using these systems as the blueprint to just make sure that we are faithful, I would say, to the body and the energy. And I'm a very intuitive person. So of course, could I put those charts somewhere else and guide a person? Yeah, I could. There's just something for me where it feels in integrity to have the blueprint, and not only one system, not only human design, not only gene keys, not only astrology. I look at all 3 charts, and then I actually feel like I have a foundation, because sometimes we are so conditioned or we have so much stress. So the person in front of me is not who it really is behind all those layers. So it helps me to see, when we start to peel the layers of the onion, what's the beautiful, shiny being that can come through. And I never judge somebody by the chart. You know, sometimes people say, oh, when you see a chart, sometimes do you feel like, oh, this is like there's no point here. Yeah, exactly. No, it's so beautiful. And there is something, I mean, 10 years of looking at charts, and I can still be surprised and fascinating of what's there and the uniqueness. You know, it's even when you have people that are born human design twins. So maybe I have 2 women who were born in different parts of the United States at the same time, but with the time difference, it's a few hours apart. So basically in their charts, the moon imprint is the only thing that changes. And still, they are very different people. And at the same time, they have some qualities that are really fascinating and very similar. So uniqueness is there. And then there are also these things that, you know, once you have started to see how accurate it is, you can't stop. And I guess that's the reason why I'm sitting here with you still, because this was not supposed for me to be a profession or something I do on an everyday basis. It definitely was something I did for me, coming out of a period in my life that was very difficult. And then I stumbled upon it, or it stumbled upon me, I don't know. And from there, it was in my personal life for a few years before people started to see the changes in me and came to me wondering, you know, where my guidance was and how I had done so much in a short time and changed my life so much. And I think that the inspiration of when, like we're saying, when we're bringing these systems in, the inspiration that we can be for others, that's what often is awakening some curiosity. So this is not something to push on people, or, you know, even maybe give somebody a human design reading. If they're not ready, they're going to be like, yeah, that was interesting, and then they're never going to listen to the recording or the report, and then it's, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it can be kind of overwhelming in the beginning when you first discover human design, or even the gene keys. I mean, when I first got that gene keys book, and I just, like, you know, I read the first chapter, the introduction, where, you know, Richard Rudd says, like, open it up like an oracle and just read whatever gene keys there. And I started doing that, and it was just like, some of the information was just like so overwhelming, you know, because these systems, you know, they're pointing to something more universal and systemic, right? And again, relating this back to my somatic work, that's often what some people find confrontational about somatic work. And you can speak, you know, as a person who works with tantra and sexuality and somatic reconditioning, that when we're confronted with all this information that points to something systemic, you know, that points to, you know, not just whatever's happened 2 months ago or last week, but something that has you looking back on your whole life and seeing these patterns and seeing these ways in which you have been operating that may have not been aligned, that's a big deal, and that can be overwhelming, not just information wise, but to somebody's system, so you're absolutely right. Like finding finding a teacher who is resonant, finding someone who is speaking at the level, or, at the place where you're really at, is super important. We were talking just a little bit before we started the podcast, and you mentioned that you're not really for everyone, and that there are ways in which your teaching of these methods can actually be considered provocative. And I love that. I think that's great, because there are people who are ready to, not just be confronted with all this information, but are ready to be like lovingly confronted with the truth of who they are. Right. And that's something that you're offering in this way of being a little bit provocative. Right. So, what about you, do you think? And you can talk about your own chart, maybe even. What about you pokes people a little bit? What about you is provocative and confrontational? And how do you feel like that is actually a service to people?
Yeah, so in the Jinky community, it's very heart-centered, which I would say I'm all heart. The only thing that exists and matters is love. Like that's the universe. That's the fabric of the universe.
Are
I'm
you a
definitely
4/6?
Yes. So of course, that's what I care about. And at the same time, I care even more in a way when it comes to the human experience about aliveness. Aliveness is so important. If you don't have aliveness, you can't feel your heart. If you can't feel your heart, you don't have a compass. So for me, life force, which is actually what we can in a way measure when it comes to aliveness, like how much do you feel your life force? How much do you feel those energy centers that are in you? We can say there are 7, or we can say there are 100. It doesn't matter. But how much can you feel the flow of energy in your body? And that's the work that you're doing as well. Going back to the numbness, when we feel cut off, when we feel numb, where there are places where there's so much unease, so we don't even go there, or movements that our body stop doing because it tunes into that part that we actually are trying to not feel into. So for me, avoiding the hurt or the pain is never the way to go. And Richard Rad, of course, he's also saying go to the shadow, because that's the door to the gift. So I agree with that. What I do also feel is that sometimes we need to go down to those chakras, the root chakra, to our sexuality. Like the deepest wound often is the sexual wound, or any wound, like the core wound we speak about in the Jinkies, is also connected to that, because it's so intimate. It has to do with our body, it has to do with our heart, it has to do with our feelings. It often has to do with an age where we were too young to really understand emotionally, intellectually, what was going on. So it's also something imprinted, I believe, from even before here, that maybe we are now evolved enough to take on something in our ancestry that was repeating itself. That's the whole thing of DNA. Like we see that it's just repeating itself. And I believe that we're coming into time now, just what we were saying before. Here we have a system that's showing the soul and the personality and the dance between the two. So we have access to more and more, because consciousness is evolving. As consciousness is evolving, and we don't have to only focus on survival, I believe that we have what we need in terms of awareness. And I believe that's the part we go and say, why me or not? Why not me? Do you have the courage to go to all these places that were hidden? And some of those places are not going to be comfortable. Some of these places are not going to feel like you're going to the heart. Some places are going to feel like you go to really the darkness, or really the density of the body. And I say, yes, if we need to go there, let's go there. I'm with you. And if I see that you're bypassing, or if I see that you're distracting, or if I see that you're in your head, or if I see that you're in other dimensions before you're even in your own body, I will bring you back, because that for me is integrity. And it's my responsibility to bring you first here. If you were supposed to be opening portals in some other universe, I don't believe that you would be here in a physical body right now in front of me as a mirror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a really, especially for people who work in these kind of more spiritual realms, I personally know some incredible, beautiful light workers who forget their bodies, who forget to be in their bodies, who don't nourish their bodies or listen to what their bodies need because they're so far off in that other dimension, in that other galaxy, right? And I agree with you. I mean, as a somatic educator, like, I believe that the experience that we're having in our bodies, our physical somatic experience, is ultimately like the key, right, to understanding and actually being able to navigate our reality and also navigate other realms, because we're having a physical experience and we cannot divorce that from the rest of our experience unless, obviously we choose to no longer have a physical experience, right? And that, of course, is going to happen to every living creature at one point, is that we transform and ascend, or whatever language you want to use with it. But yeah, that's really a powerful thing to do with someone, to walk into those dark spaces and to be with them in those painful places. What you mentioned before about sexuality, I think, is really an interesting and important piece, because for so many people there is a sexual wound, and sexuality can feel very murky and very shameful and uncomfortable, and that's definitely a seat of many people's, I think, distrust of themselves, right? And your description of being at a certain age where these certain things happened or occurred, and they didn't just happen and occur like in the world, they happened and occurred in your body, and you had a psychological, emotional, physical response to them. And then what kind of, wound, or what kind of imprint, or what kind of belief was created, right? And then how is that showing up in your life now? How is that showing up in your dealings with, sexuality or the opposite gender, or even just in yourself and how you choose to be in the world? I think these are really important questions to ask. Do you feel that when you look at someone's chart, or when you're looking at someone's astrology, that you get kind of like little clues that might help them understand how these particular sexuality issues might be showing up for them? Do you feel like there are ways of looking at that and kind of reading that language?
Yeah, 100%. There is a lot in both human design and Gene Keys. In Gene Keys, we will look at the attraction sphere, which is your unconscious moon imprint. And that's a magnetic force. And that's sometimes where we were meant to actually attract these experiences, because that's part of what the soul has chosen. And I believe also what we actually can work with, and like you were saying before we started recording, either integrate or let go of. It's part of the karma that we somehow, the soul said, okay, I'm ready for this. So for me, definitely, we can see that in the attraction sphere. And I also feel that it's something that where we are right now, it's so alive. And I have seen a lot of people also heal from things that they didn't think that they were going to be able to go there again, or there were things that had been stuck for a very long time in a certain way. And then suddenly, as you dare to go, and I'm not saying go fast, go quickly, go forcefully. No, I say go with gentleness, go soft, but have the courage to start to feel, more than start to look, to start to feel. And that often entails also having body work, some kind of de-armoring. Doesn't have to be genital de-armoring at all, but there are going to be places in the body where we have hardened when we didn't understand. It's just contraction is part of what we do when we don't understand. It's a response. And I feel like we are ready to start to open those places, but we need to be in a container that's safe with people that are safe. And that's what I feel in this world, the way that it has looked, that it's not imprinted in us yet. I mean, our awareness center that are like the reptilian part of our brain, of course, it's about survival, and it's about getting away from what could kill us. So that's also part still of our instinct, of our awareness centers, but there are new parts that are evolving. And that's what we can see certainly through human design. We see we have the instinct that is more of an animal instinct that also ties into our gut and our intuition. We also have, as human beings, the mental understanding and discernment and awareness. And then we are mutating, developing, opening up our emotional awareness. That has been a lot of kind of what was veiling the heart before, what was veiling our clarity. And now as we become more emotionally integrated and intelligent, we could say, that can actually be part of that compass. So intuition, emotions, and our intelligence as human beings with a mind, all these work together, guiding us as a guiding system. And that's, again, it's about including all these parts and not saying, oh, I can't trust my emotions, or I can't trust my instinct, or I can't trust this. No, they all actually want to come in, and together, that's where we can get a sense forward. And I believe, again, being where we are in time, where so much is changing, I feel like we need to have so much we can of ourselves and our energy and our centers and our being online, because when we are online, that's truly when we can deal with, navigate this world.
Right. And create too, actually build something for ourselves, for others, for the future, right? When we're stuck in kind of survival mode, that's not a very creative energy. That's, grasping and holding on really tight. That's not a space of creativity and flow, for people to really build something substantial for themselves in their lives. So, going back a little bit to what you said about the way that these different parts of us show up, and we've got our emotional centers, and we've got the mental stuff that's going on, and we've got our instinct, right? And human design maps that beautifully in the body graph, right? There's this wonderful thing called authority that that they offer, and to me, the way I see that is like, authority simplifies things, because otherwise there's so much information that's coming in all the time that it's very difficult to try to sort all of it and feel all of it at once, right? It can be overwhelming. I mean, I believe it can be done, this wholeness of feeling everything all at once, but it's a practice, and it takes like some time and some effort and some guidance, right, to be able to feel that level of wholeness, on a regular basis. But authority really breaks it down for me in terms of being like a quicker way, a more immediate way to get in touch with yourself and with how to make decisions. Can you speak a little bit on authority and the different kinds of authority?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just before I do that, I just want to go back and say, we said the attraction sphere in the gene keys we can see around our sexuality. And what I work a lot with in the body graph traditionally would look at everything that points from the emotional center, because we say that love or sex is emotional, which partly it is. But I also look a lot of on the tantric channels, which is actually what connects the lower chakras, the more me survival chakras, with the heart and the higher chakras. So looking at those as well for sexuality, and seeing somebody who has a lot of tantric channels, they have a lot of beautiful potential of living, feeling life force in a way that maybe we haven't even learned. I mean, it's not like we have a Taoist tradition everywhere in the Western world. So there is also a way of seeing what's your potential, what's the potential of your sexuality. That's something that we see both in the attraction sphere, with a line that speaks about some of those qualities and keynotes that you can really focus on and know that these are things that want to flourish through you. And the same thing when we look at the tantric potential that is in the body graph. And some people have a lot of that in themselves. It's almost like having bliss and ecstasy in yourself. And some people have what we call hanging gates there. So it's very much when they meet somebody else that comes with the other part, that they can feel that bliss and that multi-orgasmic way of living and being. So it's definitely, I mean, that's a very important part, I would say, of using these systems. See how energy flows, and life force is sexual energy. This is a sexual universe. Flowers are sexual. So to not make it something weird, it's part of life. This part of how this planet is existing and creating, like you were saying before.
Cool. Yeah, I totally agree. And, just on that tangent, I remember learning, a lot about the gate 10 and the gate of self-love, and how that, like, the behavior of self-love, and how that is like attracting energy to you. I found that one really fascinating when I read about it in my own chart. I don't know, is that one of the tantric gates, or is it considered one of the love gates, I think?
I mean, definitely it does connect the 10 through the 34. It connects back to the sacral. So it has that connection. So it's not the ones that are, usually we speak about the three channels that are right
Oh, you
in
mean
the
the
middle. But I
Mm.
definitely feel, and that also the 3410 is that connection from the G center or the heart center to the sacral, to the life force.
Yeah, that's an electromagnetic between me and my husband, the 34 to the 10.
And that's a beautiful channel too, in the sense that it's individual. So even if you connect there, it's about individual empowerment. It's
Yeah.
not that you become codependent. No, each one becomes more of themselves, more empowered in themselves. And for me, when I think about the 34, which your husband has, then that's a Black Panther. So there's a beautiful energy there of just being so in your body and kind of being the king or the queen of the jungle. And then the 10, we call that, Ashley and I call that in our archetypes, the natural. And like you say, it's that way of just showing up, and you have that aura of love, of self-love. And then people around you start to love themselves, because again, that inspiration of you being so much in that energy, so that it just inspires others to also empower themselves, love themselves, behave as truly naturally who they are.
Yeah. Well, I feel that. And it's often been like an interesting, just looking at that electromagnetic and looking at that channel and thinking about that, individual within the collective and the empowerment of the individual. I've really enjoyed learning about that channel and that gate, specifically in my own chart. But yeah, getting back a little bit to the authority piece, because I feel like, after many years of studying human design, last year, I finally got my own like official human design reading. Like I just hadn't done that. It's just one of these things I hadn't done. I'd been reading about it, all these books and watching videos and learning from people like you. And I just was like, you know what? I want to see how they do it. I want to see how they do the whole analysis. And so I did that last winter. And it was really fascinating because what the analyst did was really simplify so much down to definition, authority, and just be really clear about like, who I am versus where I have energy coming in. And that differentiation, like just super, super clear cut on it, was refreshing, because there's so much information and there's so much like amazing stuff to learn, that I felt like I had gotten kind of like off track about the somatic, super physically experienced approach of what is me, right? And so that's why I'm curious. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about authority and different types of authority, because as I'm a pure generator, so for me, my authority is my sacral, and that's kind of like as a binary almost. It's like yes, no, maybe, and I can get in touch with that pretty quickly when I'm not distracted by other people's emotions, or the things that are going on for me mentally, right? But there are other people who have, say, this thing called no inner authority. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how would how would you describe like these different types of authority and how they're physically experienced?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say it is a guideline and it is a simplification, and it can help us. And for many of us in the beginning, it really becomes, again, that compass, like something that we can lean on. I do feel for us that are pure generators, for example, is quite straightforward. I often say, if I put 5 plates in front of you with food on, you're just going to know where your body wants to go. That's the way that you can relate to life. You see where you flow towards, and that's what you go with. And splenic, authority is a little bit similar, but it's more kind of an instinct in the moment, and it often says no. So it actually often shows you when you should not go somewhere. At the same time, when it comes to those authorities that are a little bit more rare, and also when it comes to the aura types that are a little bit more rare. So we have manifesting generators, or generators, the aura types that are 70%. And for us, I feel that Striaton authority, especially if you have sacral authority or if we have emotional authority, it's kind of that thing about, okay, just wait to emotional clarity. And that is for, I almost feel like with the authorities, the way that I've started to see it is that we actually have to check in with all the authorities. Because if you have an open emotional center and you're around somebody has emotional authority and they are not in emotional clarity, if you are making a decision in that togetherness with the other, in that energy that isn't clear, then for both of you, that could be a decision that then turns out to not actually work. So I feel that we kind of have to check in with all the authorities in the order they go. So is there a lot of emotion going on? Okay, then wait till it calm. Okay, check. Next thing, what does my body say? What do I go towards? That's the next check-in. Then we have the splenic, that's the sacral authority. Then we have the splenic authority. And that is like, okay, I'm driving down the road and there's like this hunch of like, I should take another way home. Yeah, if you feel like you shouldn't go that way, you probably want to believe that. And then here, this is the trickiness, because then what Ra says here, if you have a splenic authority, that's definitely, you want to be spontaneous. But he says if you have an open spleen, you definitely don't want to be spontaneous. So you can, I definitely feel that it's a simplification and it works. But somehow I don't think it's 100% waterproof. I definitely think that there are people with emotional authority that have an open or a defined spleen that sometimes has a hunch and they should trust it. I don't think that it's death for you to be spontaneous always. And I believe that that's why Richard Rudd has said, okay, this is too complex. We can't just put people in boxes. So that's the kind of low, that's where we are lowering the body graph. This is where we get those authorities. Let's still just say something about the self-projected the self-projected person. There are people, and this works, that need to hear themselves speak. And that's how they are going to know in the moment. And that's an authority. You're going to know it at the same time as somebody else know it, because it's as you speak. And then there are the people that have very, very much openness in the bottom of the body graph, and they really need to speak with people and have that sounding board. And then there are people that are very reflective, like we say the lunar authority or the reflector aura, and that can take even longer. But I also think that sometimes there are reflectors that just know. I have several friends that have the same cross, the cross of the Sphinx, with gate 2 as their life's work or as their purpose. That's the gate of orientation. These are people that sometimes they actually really know. They don't have to wait 30 days or a lunar cycle. So for me, you can hear as I'm speaking, I'm like, yeah, check in with each one of the authorities. But then I feel like somehow in the spleen, then we don't know, like, what do I listen to? My hunches, or is that dangerous if I don't have the spleen defined? So yeah, these are also the times I would say, trust your body, trust your allies, find out the relationships that are win-win, where there is reciprocity. So you have somebody that can be a sounding board, that doesn't only want to impose their view on you. And I believe the more you are in your body, whether you have a defined spleen or not, the more you can trust it. And emotions, when they're very on a high or very on a low, for nobody is really the moment of making important decision. And become a little bit of a diva. That's okay. This also goes together with people that have a defined will or an undefined will. 70% we have undefined will. So we are not here to promise. To become a little bit of a diva and say, let me think about it. Let me feel into it. Let me sleep on it. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Or my intention is I'll go there. But then if you drive down the road and you're like, no, I'm not supposed to go there. Well, drive to the woods and do something else. I feel like there is something, again, with conditioning, where we are functioning in a way that is sourced from the outside. And when we come on the inside, a lot of these things, I feel like they're going to be second nature. And I would say, to kind of summarize all this, what Ra said is that if you follow Strident Authority for long enough, that's also when you're going to be able to be passenger consciousness, so that your mind kind of sits in your body looking out, and you allow your body to be natural. Right. And then it's not so much of like, am I listening to my authority? Am I, respecting my aura type? No, it becomes second nature, but you need to peel off what isn't you in order for that to happen.
The conditioning, the layers, that makes a lot of sense. And, going back to the basics and kind of getting back to like these guidelines, it was super helpful for me. And then I didn't fixate on it. I kind of just integrated that even more fully, and was reminded of it being a lived experience, versus just all these really fascinating things to learn about, right? And so I think what you're saying is really great, because it is a place to start. And then as you continue with, as Ra describes it, the experiment, or following and doing how does Richard Rudd describe it with the gene keys? Is it an experiment, or does he use other language?
I mean, the way that he says is that everything is a contemplation. Everything happens in the pause.
Yes.
When you're just, witnessing,
Totally.
you could say.
Yeah. So as you continue with the experiment and the contemplation, and you start to live with this knowledge of yourself, it does become natural. It does become more like flowing, rather than like all these the rigidity of the rules and checking in and like, but that stuff is valuable in the beginning. Like, I find that giving people structure in the beginning is very valuable when they're learning something new, when they're learning a new way of relating to their bodies. They're learning a new way of respecting their consciousness, and having those rules is very helpful in the beginning. But then letting them go is also like another layer, another step in the process of becoming more free, right?
Yeah, and it's very easy to misunderstand them, unfortunately, because that's what you see, people that feel disempowered. Oh, I am so frustrated because I don't know what it means to respond, and I have to wait around, and like I feel like I have to do this with my hands because I'm so used to doing things. But actually, as a pure generator like you and I, even when I see my orchid over there and I remember that I haven't given it water for the last week, and that I have the curtain behind it that actually should be open so it gets more light. Like when I go to that orchid, I give it water, I open the curtain, I'm responding to life. We tend to also complicate it. And that's why we misunderstand it, not because it's wrong necessarily, but we misunderstand it. And that's the same thing of like somebody, we take the spleen again, that like, oh, I can't be spontaneous. And that's why they don't go for that kiss that would have been amazing in that moment. And it was just the perfect moment for a kiss. Like then you've misunderstood, because it's not like it's going to change your life. Yeah, maybe it will change your life, that kiss. But like I feel that sometimes it can also rob us of our aliveness and life experience when we become really rigid about, okay, do I have emotional clarity? Maybe I'm still not clear. So I'm just going to wait for 2 more weeks to see if I'm clear. But, maybe as an emotional authority, we say that even 75% be feeling sure about something, it's clarity. Because when you are an emotional type, we know that emotions are moving all the time. So you're never going to be 100% sure that maybe somebody who has sacral splenic authority is just like, it's not even I'm sure, it's like I already did it, so of course I was sure, because you knew your truth in the now. So but it definitely, I agree, the guidelines are super helpful, but when you feel like they're becoming something that ties you, then I feel like don't allow it to be handcuffs on you. Right. See it as guidelines. But you always, the more, and this goes back to what we spoke about before too, the more you're home in your body, the more you feel safe in your body, the more you can travel and live and dance in this world and beyond this world. But that is actually even a little bit dangerous, quote unquote, when you're not home and you're not safe, because both what you're doing in a fragmented way in this world and in relationships, going back to what you were saying, a lot of people don't trust themselves with sexuality. It's because we're not home, we're not safe. And then imagine you leave your body and you go astral traveling in other realms. What happens with your body while you're not there? These are the things where, like you're saying, it starts with the body. Once you're home, then actually life starts.
Right. And that fragmentation, those, you even could, imagine it as like little cracks or open spaces in our aura. And if we're not protected, meaning that we're not embodied and in our aura and in our body fully, it leaves space for other things to step in, whether it's other people's emotions or, entities, or other energies that have an opening that we may be unconsciously attracting, right? And not recognizing that it's impacting us, and that we end up carrying around other people's karma and memories and experiences that don't really belong in our auric field, but that we unconsciously made space for and invited in by not being fully in ourselves, by not being fully embodied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know, I have one little thing, because I feel like things are coming in. You know how this is a living transmission, whether we're speaking, for me, it's the same transmission, human design and gene keys. It's like Richard Rudd studied with Ra for over 20 years, and then he found his own way of mapping. And what I feel is that when we have those conversations, there is new information that can come in. So what comes in for me, as we have been speaking about the inner authority and the spleen specifically, what comes to me as something we can use as a tool is breath. Whether you have a defined or undefined spleen, in order to know if that's a fear response, because we have fear here in the awareness center of the spleen, I believe that you can use the breath to both to breathe out what's not yours, what the fears that are not yours, or the instincts that come from not from you but from the outside. And breath is going to help you to feel your intuition. Breath is going to help you to feel if there is something that is for real dangerous. Breath is going to help you to feel if that spontaneous thing is a grounded thing to do. Like, there is something with presence and breath that is really important with how the spleen functions. And I feel also for the open spleen that is much more sensitive when it comes to, you know, allopathic medicine, for example. Like, when you're really present, when you're breathing, I feel like you're going to know, is that Advil good for you? Or could you go and just do some acupressure points on your neck or somewhere else? Like, there's definitely something with that part of us that has to do with the immune system, that has to do with instinct and intuition, that when we come back to presence and breath, I feel like for all of us, there is so much wisdom in that splenic center that can come through.
Yeah, wow. And I mean, because breath is such an instinctual part of us. We wouldn't be here without it. And it is something that is regulated by our autonomic nervous system. It happens automatically. We don't have to think about breathing. But when we bring our conscious awareness to our breath, right? And this was something I know, as my background in teaching yoga and pranayama for many years, you know, there are different ideas about breath. One is that we need to control our breath. And the other idea is that we need to get in touch with our breath, and that we can guide our breath. And that's not quite the same as controlling our breath. It's actually inviting our system to be self-regulating, right? Instead of like doing these, you know, intense breath work things as a way to, you know, control it or make it a certain way, right? Get our breath back. Instead, do something a little more gentle to allow our breath to actually return to an autonomic way. So one way that I often will describe it is just that your awareness will start to shift something. And this is especially true of your breath. Like, even just now, as we started talking about breath, I guarantee most people listening already started noticing their breathing. Maybe they automatically started breathing just a little bit deeper. Maybe they noticed their belly expanding as they were breathing, right? And maybe allowed for a little bit more of that to occur simply by talking about it, simply by pointing to it, right? And then, of course, there are many different methods of breathing that provide many different types of, you know, nervous system responses. But the simplicity of breath is that you can bring your awareness to it, and your awareness will start to shift it in the moment. And that's a really powerful tool. So it's quite fascinating that you linked that to the spleen, because I absolutely agree. It is a deep part of our nervous system functioning in order to live. Our bodies will try to breathe to get oxygen, even if we're underwater and then we drown, right? Because our system will make that happen, will make that gulp for air occur. So very, very deep part of us. How do you feel that other types of somatic practices have synthesized into your work with Gene Keys and with human design? Since you brought up, breath work and things like this, are there other kinds of somatic practices that you have felt really go well with these methods, with these techniques?
Yeah, definitely. So that's also what we're speaking about before we started recording. My initiation was very much through plant medicine when I started to really open up my heart and my mind and all the parts of me for the beautiful reality that we're here in, and that often when we live our little lives every day, we are distracted from. And I was into the plant medicine as my deep own journey. My mom was very spiritual and very much a seeker, and very much into the Course in Miracle and that kind of spirituality. But really for me, I feel like it was more of that, the Native American way and the red road that opened up for me. However, I could see that there are people that kind of get stuck in that, because then that becomes reality for them and the only truth. So about maybe 6-7 years ago, I did step out of that as well. And I worked much more with the body. And I said, the medicine is in here. I know, like I said, if we come home and are safe in the body, the portals are just going to open. We can go anywhere from there. And I worked with a system that's called True Body Intelligence. Is a man out of LA. He's a former Navy SEALs, and he's also a synthesizer. He is a 5'1", so it's a transpersonal profile, and he has combined, he actually uses human design as well. I remember when I started working with him, he was a client first. He came to me for Gene Keys because he had looked at 7,000 human design charts for all the clients that he had seen for the last 10 years or something. He was a new raw back in the days. And working with him, which is very much connected to just understanding that everything is stress. Like everything that can sit in the body comes from stress. And he speaks about stroma, stress and trauma, and how we also connect it to the breath, how we can access those places, and how we can start to kind of, if we are twisted or if we are numb, how we can start to open that up. And it's very physical. He actually uses one of the systems that is kind of the basis of what he does is Bob Cooley and resistance stretching. So which is actually based on I can't remember the name of the yoga, something with A, the yoga where you're always using resistance. It's not that you're just stretching, because you can actually overstretch, but where you have resistance all the time as you're doing in every asana.
Resistance like using bands, or resistance like within your own body, like moving in a way that you supply your own body with that feedback?
Yeah, exactly. It's completely just with the body. And that system is also allowing you to build strength that is, isometric strength, not just that usually we are either just in the gym kind of pumping, or we're just in the yoga mat just becoming more elastic, but it's to create actually that elastic way of the body, which we want to be with everything. Like we want to be able to, whatever happens to us, whatever shock happens to us, we want to be able to kind of, have that elasticity, to not break. And his system, of course, the way that I worked with him, it was very intense in the sense that I'm kind of a warrior in the way that I am. And I've done so much with yoga and so much body work before. So it was definitely intense in the way that he worked. I know that he has worked with some of the people that I know that are projectors and other aura types. And they're like, no, but he's so sweet. And I'm like, what? You mean, how can you say that? That was like a warrior. That was a Navy SEALs training in itself. But that's just because, again, that's my way of doing it. So he, in a way, probably was just mirroring my way. Yeah. But to kind of summarize, really, for me, that's something that I'm using also with people. Part of that too is there is one part of that work where you are actually walking, it sounds very intense, on the meridians, on the bladder meridian that's on the back of the legs of the body. So you put the person on their stomach, and then you put like a yoga mat, you put something under, and then you can actually mash the back of the legs, and we have tension there. Like you work with muscular, and many of us, when that happens, even if we feel pain, we hold our breath and we're like, okay, you're just gonna let it happen, but actually, if you don't breathe, your muscles don't get oxygen. You're actually not going to be able to really work with the tissue.
You increase the tension.
Exactly. And number two, you're increasing the way that you're not authentic in life. Because what I think is important, and this is also for me part of Tantra, we need to breathe, of course, to the extent that we feel the discomfort and the pain in order for that those blockages or this numbness to open. But I would definitely say I would like us all to breathe to the extent we feel pain or pleasure. Because some of us, we don't dare to breathe and make sound and move with pleasure, and some of us, we don't dare to do it with pain, and most of us, we don't dare to do it with either. So part of this aliveness is to actually start in your life to become more honest with how you show up. And then going back to breath, it's such a beautiful catalyst for life and for everything, to be able to breathe to the intensity of pleasure or the intensity of pain. And then we can integrate, work through, go to the other side of every experience in a way that is authentic, honest, and integrated.
Yeah, and self-expressed, right, too, because that vocal expression is something that is very natural to human beings. I mean, every baby will cry to get their needs met. Most, unless they've had some deep interruption to their nervous system and trauma, through birth or something like that. That is a natural function of most beings, is to vocalize their needs, and vocalize their experience. And so part of, regaining that natural self-expression is part of what I think you're describing here, is allowing ourselves to actually express what we're experiencing and allow that to be moved out or shared or experienced fully by us, right? That it's really interesting about the resistance that you're talking about, and that, because immediately, I start thinking about it as biofeedback that the brain gets about the proprioceptive awareness of the body and where my body is, like internally, that sensation of knowing where my body is at any given moment. And, coming from a yoga background too, there's a lot of that overstretching and the pulling on our bodies, right? That ends up disorienting us because we lose touch with those spaces that have become kind of overly stretched out, like your ligaments, for example. Some people, in the yoga world, even myself, you can put your leg behind your head, but you're stretching your ligaments. Should you really be doing that? Are your ligaments then going to be able to give you that information about how your joints are moving, or are they going to be all wobbly, and unstable and not giving you that feedback about how you're moving and where your body is, right? So there's a whole piece to this around internally sensing ourselves, that it sounds like this method gave you some really clear tools about how to find that biofeedback, that resistance about where the boundaries of your body are, and also to start using that feedback to investigate where things might be being held, where emotions or energy or fear or pain might be being stored within our bodies that we have become unconscious or numb to, right? Because of life, because of the things that come in and all the disorienting information that's constantly coming at us from the world, from the outside world, right? To take that space to actually give your body that resistance, and I'd have to try the method myself to know exactly what you're talking about. But we do something really similar in my somatic work, but we are doing it on a very, very gentle, subtle level, where we're actually positioning and moving your body in such a way under the load of gravity. So we have gravity supply that load, and we move super slow and with really careful precision, so that you actually receive that biofeedback from the load of gravity. So I don't know if this is at all similar to what he was doing, but the method that I teach is just very, very gentle, in the sense that we sometimes work with micro movements. And we do try to avoid pain, although sometimes it's not possible, because we're trying to create maximum safety for the person in their physical experience during the session. And so the more that we can do things like more and more gently, more and more micro, their nervous system starts to super calm, and relax, because they feel not only like where their body is and that orientation, but they feel really safe in experiencing whatever they're experiencing, including pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really enjoy hearing about this other type of method, and that there's, some similarities in creating that proprioceptive awareness. I mean, in terms of the internal experience, like traveling in your body to discover like what you've been carrying and what you've been holding on to, I know that obviously like plant medicine is like this like blast of lightning. How do you feel that these more somatic approaches that you've been getting into, how do you feel that they work a little more slowly, right? And then say plant medicine does. And like what do you think is the benefit to a more gradual approach versus kind of that lightning bolt of like ayahuasca or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason why I stepped out of that world was that I felt like we were sometimes just flushing the system, and the system doesn't even understand what goes on, not on an understanding level, sometimes not on a heart level. The heart, I'm not so concerned, because the heart can't crack in a bad way. The heart cracks, it might hurt in the moment, but it can only open. The heart is the only thing that is indestructible, is what I want to say. But when it comes with the other parts of us that isn't the heart, like not just the physical heart, but I'm speaking about the higher heart, I do believe we need to go with ease and softness and gentleness. And sometimes, especially with that more strong approach, the red road, which is the Colombian way of doing ayahuasca, it was definitely not gentle. And I feel that it's not for everyone, and it can even be re-traumatizing. And it can also happen in a way where, like you say, you don't have a gradual understanding what's going on. So that could be re-traumatizing, in the same way that sometimes I'd take the example when I was living in France. I was 18 or 19 years old, and I started to do breath work more. I can't even remember if it had a specific name, but it would be sessions of like 5 hours, and it would be like crying and pounding and around on like mattresses on the floor. And I would walk out on the streets of Paris feeling like completely, I was still almost crying. Maybe I would feel completely out of center. I would feel completely fragmented, and I would feel like I had just re-traumatized everything that I have ever felt in my whole life. And I can, looking back, of course, no, that was not a gentle approach. Did I bring up some feelings? Yeah, but I wasn't able to integrate them, and I was definitely not able to let them go, because again, there wasn't that safety and that understanding on all levels what actually was what I was doing. So I definitely feel that the medicine is in us. And I think that sometimes we need a little microdose of something, whether that's a person that's provocative, whether it's a little something to poke on us and say, this is possible. And then from there is this seed that wants to grow and that wants to sprout through us. But I am 100% for the methods that are our own medicine. And I believe that life force is one of the strongest thing we can work with. And I also feel that those of us that have worked with yoga and that know that Kundalini is not dangerous and that have this aliveness in us, that we are also here again to inspire and be catalyst for that in others. I could definitely be a sex worker. I could definitely be somebody who wakes up the body just by understanding some of those points, some of the places where we can tap on the neck, on the collarbone, on the hips, like feeling in the hips. We can awaken there. And it's like we become priests and priestesses. And it doesn't have to be touching genitals or anything, but just by walking around in the world and having aliveness in you in different ways that you interact with people that are more or less intimate, you are going to be a catalyst for an aliveness. And that's the beautiful thing, because when we all awaken to our own uniqueness, that's also when I believe that we are going to ascend together, because we're all going to be able to make choices that are high frequency choices. They're going to be able to lift the whole planet, because
Right.
we are not in numbness and distraction as we are walking forward or backwards.
Right. And those higher level functions of humanity, like cooperation, and and actually creating self-sustaining, sustainable plans for living, that's going to be a really important part of our future, as we can all see. It's going to be a really important part of sustaining our lives on this planet as we continue. And so this aliveness, this radiance, this level of like fully embodied experience of life is so essential. We can think about, some people think about this kind of work and they think of it as being, kind of like self-indulgent or something, right? I've heard that criticism. But when you really look at like what we're pointing to, what's so imperative in the future of humanity, this work is not selfish at all. It is actually very, very selfless. It is about creating a self that can be sustainable in the world with other people, in relation to other people, and build something and create something that's going to actually make the world more functional, right?
And I want to add something there as well about purification, because it's not self-indulgent. It's actually, again, going back to courage. Once you're awakening parts of you, it starts the purification process. It starts something that says, okay, there are going to be places where you're selfish. There are going to be places that all that is becoming apparent. And then you have to tend to it. You have to work with it. And that's also why being more alive, it's making you a more virtuous person, because you're going to have to look at all these places where there is still corruption. You're like, oh, hey, there's some corruption here. Okay, I have to tend to that. And that's the way. And we're never done. I always speak about spirals, and I come back to places where I thought I had worked through that, where I thought that I wouldn't have to mirror that in a relationship again. But every time I come back, it's with a little bit more awareness, a little bit more wisdom, and often more love and more self-love. Of like, okay, this time it was just one difficult conversation. It didn't have to be chaotic for a month, like you can see yourself as you are in that spiral. And every time you come around, there is a little bit more of the heart, a little bit more truly of what you're capable of as the unique, beautiful, evolving being that you are.
Beautiful. Yeah, you get to really check in with your own development. Like what you just said about it didn't take me 2 months. It just had to be one difficult conversation. You get to see the development of yourself, through this process. That speaks to me a lot. And the idea of in spirals and really getting in touch with our humanity and being able to see when we're being petty, when we're being small, when we're being difficult, or whatever shows up, because we're never done with that. We're never done with being human. It's always going on as long as we're living in our bodies, right? And I like to tell this to my clients too, because like they will experience such a level of calm and centeredness from me and my nervous system that they will start to kind of like put me on a pedestal or something. And I like to remind them, I'm like, I get dysregulated too. I get cranky, I get tired, I get, fussy about things. Like I'm a human being, and we're dealing with this collectively, these shadows, these, darker places. The idea that I think, Gene Keys and the philosophies that we've been talking about today allow us to have some freedom within our humanity is that we don't have to be stuck there. We don't have to live there in the shadows. That doesn't have to be how everything shows up on a day-to-day basis. That's a place that is always there and that we need to attend to, just like we, farmers tend to the soil to help things grow, right? But it doesn't have to be like the ongoing reality of darkness.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and just the beautiful journey that you're on personally today. Before we close up, I would really love to ask you if you would just share a little bit about your personal experience with discovering human design and Gene Keys, maybe a little bit about what, discovering Tantra, any part of your story that would just allow our listeners to connect a little bit deeper with you as we close out our beautiful talk today.
Yeah, so starting from the beginning, I was born in the 80s, and my mom had already been on a journey, a spiritual journey for a long time. I believe she had a Kundalini awakening in 1967 with transcendental meditation. I don't think that she really understood what happened. It was in a little village. She was 19 years old, and she was having this prayer to Lakshmi, which wasn't the god that she grew up with. So it was something that was a little bit too big for her to actually be able to hold in her body. And I think that that's partly what propelled her with many other things, as mercury poisoning and environmental stress, that put her in a situation where she was diagnosed with MS and other neurological problems or symptoms. So in my childhood, she was already seeking. And like I said before, the Course in Miracle, Reiki, all these things that were kind of new and new age in the 80s. Gestalt therapy, well, all these different things. And I was an only child. She couldn't have more children. She had a miscarriage after me because of, and actually I was a twin. She had a miscarriage while she was pregnant with me as well. So I was that only child that she could have. And I was with her on all these different things. We had wheatgrass growing in the laundry room. Like, she was so before her time. She has Gene Key or Gate 7 in her life's work, which is about the future of humanity. She was decades before everyone. And I think her body was not really able to hold that frequency yet because she came in the 40s, right?
Mm.
So with that being said, I was already born into spirituality, but there is something where I think that each one of us, we need to find our own way. So like I told you before, plant medicine was part of my awakening. Tantra was more kind of on a, stumbling on it, because I was on a raw food festival in Sweden, and there was a Tantra festival right after, and they asked me if I wanted to volunteer. And I find myself in this, I think it's the biggest Tantra festival in Europe or in Northern Europe. And I find myself with 800 other people. And I'm like, wow, this is what I've done all my life. Like, this is so home for me. This is so natural for me. And then what happened after that was that I still had one foot in each world in a way. I went to business school. I did an MBA at UCLA. I was a consultant. I was engaged to a diplomat who was a brilliant man, but in many ways as well, he was very conditioned. He's a 4-6 as well, and he has only 3 centers that are defined. So we were kind of a beautiful couple like Ken and Barbie, but there was so much potential in us that we didn't even know how to tap into, because we were so, in a way, guided from the outside of what we could be. I spoke 6 languages. He was brilliant, but somehow that led us astray instead of leading us home. So with all that, I actually had to leave that relationship. I found myself in Sweden. This is more than about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I found myself in Sweden working for a startup, but just feeling like I hadn't lived in Sweden for 12 years, I think. And it was, okay, I'm back in Sweden. I'm 27 or something. And after everything I've done in my life, I'm sitting here at the beautiful Airbnb on the floor in the kitchen. And my nervous system, I feel so anxious, like if I had a knife against my throat, or if I was a scared animal. That's how I feel in my nervous system. I feel like everything went wrong, that everything I did between 20 and 30, it somehow I ended up here on the floor, and is this my life? And it started actually to become this dark night of the soul, where for the 8 months after that, it wasn't even thoughts. It was just this kind of paralyzed feeling of, who is tucking me to the floor, and where is God? Like God. And I don't think I could actually take my life, because I never had any thoughts like that. But I would speak to God every day saying, if this is my life, it's not worth it. If this is my life, please, it's not worth it. And I didn't feel heard, but I still kept saying it. And then I was able to, in some way, and you understand nervous system. So I was able to exhaust my nervous system by not sleeping for 2 or 3 nights, because when I did that, I could have a day where I felt a little bit more stable, because I was too exhausted to be anxious, I guess, or too exhausted to be paralyzed. So I was able to book my ticket to Solana Beach. And why? Well, I had been asked if I could help 3 different small companies to set up an office in Solana Beach. Austin, from San Francisco, I think, and from San Diego. And suddenly I sat there on the airplane and I kind of felt normal. As I walked off that plane in San Diego, I didn't have any of everything that I had experienced for the year before. Suddenly I was all back into centeredness. I had a purpose. I became that stable person that these people could count on. There was problems with mold and inundations and stuff that happened when I was there. I was stable. I was in my Taurus self. I was in the second gate or gene key, that orientation that everybody could trust. It just shifted from one day to another. And I think the third day I was having breakfast on the terrace over the cliffs of Solana Beach, and my friend sends me a human design chart, and he says, "I think you would like this. I just signed up with a program with this woman, Rosie Aronson, who did the Wisdom Keeper cards and the Dream Arc." And I remember just feeling again my truth in the now. I had to do that, and I booked the same thing with her. I drove up the coast, this beautiful coast from San Diego all the way up to San Francisco. It's just in itself, that's a journey, right? And I had my first session in her living room with Rosie, and she introduced me both to human design and gene keys. And I started to work with her. I worked with her bi-weekly for 4.5 years. And that's what started again to peel the layers. And I changed my life. I couldn't continue to do the things that killed my soul. To speak, to summarize it, I had to start aligning with that. And like you say, there are still days where I feel like, oh God, I do the same thing. I work for 16 hours and then I have no energy to even exist, and then I'm like, okay, this is my old pattern of perfectionism, of doing too much, of proving myself, of running the hamster wheel. But that makes me human, like you say. And then I work with somebody who has a similar pattern, and then I understand that. So for me, with this, I guess there are two things that I feel like we can never underestimate how much quantum leaps are possible when we align with truth and when we dare to believe in our capacity and the capacity of the heart. And the capacity of the heart is often not logic to the brain. Like imagine me being in a country in a very serious anxiety, hormonal imbalance with thyroid and adrenal problems, going to the States where I don't have social security, where I don't even, at that time, I don't even know if I had a visa. Yeah, I did have a visa, but like anything could have happened. It could have even become really dangerous. But trusting that gut feeling that I needed to get up from that floor or from that corner that I was sitting paralyzed in for a year, and I needed to live. I needed to be alive. And trusting that changed everything in a snap of fingers. And that's possible. And I think that that's also why I feel that when we are ready for a quantum leap, or when we're ready to go through a portal, when human design and gene keys comes to us and they can support us through that change, whether that is a divorce, whether that is a loved one that dies, whether that is us starting our own company. Like there are so many changes that can be life-changing for us. And these systems are really, really helpful, not as crutches, but as blueprints and maps and compasses of how we can navigate that new territory where we have never been before.
Wow. Yes. Oh man, what's a really awesome story. It feels like it just was, what's the word I'm looking for? Providence. Right? Like it just, the way you explain it and describe it, going from like basically one reality to another reality, and how that literally traveling to a different part of the world opened something up for you. I traveled for many years and I really relate to that, because sometimes it really is about changing our location. And I think this could go back to a little bit about the spleen. Our spleen is often trying to give us information about our environment and saying, get out of here, right? Like go, this isn't the right space for you, and just that connection that you made with Rosie and building that knowledge. Like you obviously really connected with this right away. It really, became part of you right away. And that's just so incredibly beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. These are the kind of stories that I love to share on this podcast about somatic awakening, about awakening up to ourselves, because we're all capable of it. Every human being is capable of really waking up to themselves and being fully present in their bodies. And getting that initiation, like you said, can come from plant medicine. It can come from these, unexplainable, heart-driven experiences that don't make any sense when we think about them logically, right? And it can come from simply hearing other people's stories. You mentioned hearing a client with the same pattern as you, and then suddenly you see yourself in them, you understand yourself more, and now you have compassion for both them and yourself. And then that compassion, that metta, can spread, and you feel more compassion for humanity as a whole. So awesome story. Really loved that. Thank you so much, Bella, for joining me today. Do you have any last thoughts? Would you like to tell our listeners where they can find you and connect with you to learn more about your work?
Yeah, anything Unlock Your Design, whether that's on Facebook or our website, and then on Facebook as well, Bella Krystal. And I post a lot of things every day that just comes from inspiration in the heart, very 4-6. I love community. Where our Facebook group now that I created 2 years ago has 12,000 people, and at least 80% of these people is active every week, which is a lot for a Facebook group. So I think that would be a starting point coming into the Gene Keys and Human Design group. But you find it if you go Bella Krystal on Facebook, you find all the groups that I am admin for. And that's just a starting place, a field to start in. And then from there, use your inner navigation system to feel into if you want to go deeper into learning something or working with me or whatever is right for you in the field of astrology, human design, and Gene Keys.
Beautiful. Yes. Great. And, I originally connected by one of your 2019 YouTube videos. I don't know if you still have the YouTube channel, but those were really great. Those were very great, like fundamental learning tools for me. So for other people out there, I do recommend Bella's videos that she's created about the houses system. Like when you look at the 6 lines of the gene key through the analogy of the house, I felt like you described that really wonderfully when I was first discovering gene keys and learning about that. And then of course, anybody who wants to connect and learn more, we'll have that information in the show notes about where you can find more information about Bella and her work. Thank you so much today. It's been an absolute pleasure to share with you, to co-create with you this conversation and talk about these really important things.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. To find out more information about today's guest, check the show notes. And to find out more information about me, Amy Takaya, and the Radiance program, visit www.freeyoursoma.com.